Welcome to the It's Time podcast with your host, Professor Dale Feinauer from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.
Greetings. Welcome to another podcast, the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs podcast. We're here in A.J. Armstrong's shop. Today's a little bit different. I have been doing interviews of individuals that you've seen. I have done solos, and today I'm going to be interviewed. So with us today, Madisen Potratz, who is the originator of the idea of even doing these, who today will be interviewing me. So I'm on the other side of the desk.
That is right. Let's see how this goes.
This will be fun.
All right. So you ready to just dive right in?
Yes.
Okay. Well, here we go. So now it's your chance to tell us about you and what has made you the leader that you are today.
What has made me the leader I am today? I'm a fan of stories, so I will do a story. I think the most important characteristic in many ways in being a leader is having empathy, is being able to understand other individuals, their emotions and their perspectives, and to be very careful about the authority that you have as a leader. Well, when I was in the fourth grade, I wrote a report, Animals of the Polar Region. It was one heck of a report, if I do say so myself. Nice pictures taken out of the National Geographic, wrote stuff up, etc. Turned the thing in, got it back. I got whatever, an A, a B for content, but I got an F for handwriting. And the teacher, Mrs. Rhodes, had me walk up and down the aisles showing this report to the other students while she explained to the other students that I was never going to go anywhere in life because my writing was terrible and I would never amount to anything. This taught me a lot about empathy and about the possible power that you would have in front of the classroom or as a leader that if you're not careful could hurt somebody. Now, my reaction to this, I think, was interesting. I got about halfway through the class. I dropped the report on the ground. I looked at the teacher and said, as bad as my writing is, it's better than your teaching, and I left. Fourth grade. I was out. Got home. My mother, who was a stay-at-home mom at the time, she was actually working on her teaching certificate, had clearly gotten a phone call from the school. I explained to my mother, what had happened. She said, okay, fine. This was lesson number 2 in terms of leadership. We went back to the school. She sat down with the principal while I sat in the office waiting. And what seemed like hours to me, but as a kid in fourth grade, when your mother's talking to the principal, probably a short amount of time feels like a very long. They came out and my mother said, okay, Dale, you're going back to the classroom. You will say nothing to the teacher about this. The teacher will say nothing to you about it. When I asked my mom about it later, the principal insisted that I go back into the classroom and apologize to the teacher for my conduct. My mother insisted that the teacher apologize to me for my conduct, and they continued this negotiation for some period of time until they reached a truce where we both just said nothing about it. But it taught me a lot about empathy, about the power that you can have when you're in charge, and that you don't want to use that to hurt people, that you have to be very careful. And this was kind of an egregious, but even unintentionally, you could do that. It also taught me something about the importance of people having your back, and my mother having my back at that point, and negotiating with the principal that I did not have to apologize, because I would still argue I did nothing wrong, I think was important. And I'm glad that occurred. It was painful at the time, but it was a good learning experience for me in the fourth grade, and I think it's been a seminal part of who I am and who I am as a leader.
Yeah, I was not expecting you to dig back into fourth grade. I thought you would start in your 20s or something. But all right, starting young. You were a leader from childhood onward.
Yeah, I was. Yes.
Okay, so what do you wish you had known about leadership when you were younger? Maybe not in fourth grade. Maybe we are getting into your 20s now. But what do you wish you knew kind of when you were starting out, really having like direct reports and managing people?
There's a bunch of stuff that I wish I had known differently when I started out, first in my craft as a teacher and as a leader. When I meet someone who was a student in one of my classes previously, I always ask, oh, when was that? And if it was one of my first 2 years, I always apologize. I say, oh, I'm sorry. You should probably get a refund because I'm sure I was not good. In fact, one of my early student evaluation of instruction comments was, hopefully insightful, Dale has the potential to become a good teacher. Well, now, the only way you can read that is at this point in time, yeah, you pretty much suck. But we think you got a shot. And as a teacher, I had a lot to learn. As a leader, I had a lot to learn. I think the thing is, I think back to when I was assistant manager of a restaurant that I really wish I had known more about and thought about was how to balance the expectations of the organization, the need for the employees to get things done, for the dishwasher to have clean dishes, for the cook to cook the food, for the waitstaff to bring the food to the tables, etc., and get the stuff done, with balancing that with understanding the individuals as people. The importance of the military, you'll hear it described as, we got to make sure the troops have dry socks, and we got to make sure that the troops take the hill. Well, balancing taking the hill with the dry socks, understanding that concept and understanding the importance of balancing those two and when to focus more on the dry socks and when to focus more on taking the hill was something I really very poorly appreciated when I was a college student and was managing a restaurant. And hopefully I've gotten somewhat better at that.
Oh, yeah. So you talk about delegating and you know, sharing the load of work, but have you ever run into an issue where you kind of want to do it all, like you don't trust people to do the work for you? Or what kind of advice would you give to someone who maybe easier than leading is to just do the role of 4 different people?
Oh, I think you're raising an outstanding question. My experience has been that the most difficult promotion in an organization, the most difficult step of the leadership hierarchy, if you will, is going from a line employee to an immediate supervisor, to being a first level manager, for exactly what you've described. As a first level, as a line employee, the expression, if you want something done right, do it yourself, makes a lot of sense. And you can be good at what you do because you take responsibility and you think it through and you do all the parts of it and you make sure everything is happening. As you move into leadership, your job has shifted from, if you want it done right, do it yourself, to create an environment in which other individuals can be successful. And if you're not willing to make that transition, if you're not willing to let go of the details, if you're not willing to delegate and let other people do it and do it somewhat differently than you might have done it, you're not going to succeed as a leader. I had one real advantage when I was moving into leadership and was faced with this potential struggle of, you know, if you want it done right, do it yourself. I want to take control. I want to do it all, or I want to delegate it. And I have the advantage of being lazy. So it was fairly easy for me to delegate things to others because it was, oh, Dale, you can do it, or maybe somebody else can do it. Well, I've always, I really shouldn't say lazy, but I have been big on being efficient, and I've been big on trying to find the best way to do it. And it strikes me there are often people who can do these other parts of it as well or better than I, and it makes more sense for them to do it. So I really never had a problem letting go of control.
Okay. It's funny. I was just listening to an audiobook this weekend. I was listening to Tom Sawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Children's book, but fun
oh,
book
no,
to listen to.
There's
and
stuff
him
in there.
getting the kids to whitewash the fence. You know, I read that as a kid and I'm like, well, that's clever. And I read that as an adult and I'm like, that's very clever. I'm going to take some of that for myself. And it kind of reminds me of You seem very Tom Sawyer to me.
I am a fan of Tom Sawyer.
Okay.
I think Mark Twain's writing are absolutely fascinating, insightful, and it's great the way he can get a lot of humor around some of the real truths of our society that have maintained over time.
Yeah, reason why the book has stood the test of time. All right, could you describe your leadership style and maybe how it's describe how it is now, and then maybe describe the whole arc of it and how it's changed over time?
Okay. My leadership style. I think of my leadership style as being very much of a delegation-focused style. I think of what I'm good at is coming up with ideas. I'm very good at brainstorming an idea or taking an idea. I think these podcasts are a great example. Somebody else, you in this case, started the idea of, oh, maybe we should be doing podcasts in the college. Dale, maybe you should play some role in this. Oh, well, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, maybe that makes sense. Okay, well, let's pursue that. And I think of my skill, the thing I'm good at, is taking that idea and saying, okay, what do we got to do to make this a reality? How do we go from having the concept of doing podcasts to actually having podcasts that are going to be out and distributed, et cetera? All right, well, what do we got to do? Let's learn more about this. And I think my skill is getting the right people in the room and empowering them so they can run with various parts of this. Yeah, I'm doing these podcasts, and at some level, I'll probably get some credit for doing it. But at some level, I shouldn't, because I haven't done anything. I mean, other people, you've done all kinds of stuff in terms of figuring out how to get this to happen, how to make the contracts happen, how to promote this, how to, et cetera. Other people, Tara's done a bunch, AJ's done a bunch. There's all these people that have done stuff to make this happen. I was just bright enough to get them in a room, buy them lunch, and say, how are we going to do this? And shut up and listen. And then come here and do what I always do, which is talk. So it's that ability to delegate, but to do it in a way where people feel ownership of it. There was some joking that when we were coming up with these podcasts, what were we going to call them? And we focus now on it's time to feed the fire of your leadership skills. And we think of that as a bit of our motto. But somebody suggested calling them the Feinauer, which would be a play on my name, a Feinauer. And I quickly nixed that and said, no, we're not going to call it the Feinauer. I have plenty of ego. But that to me that's not a way to make this our idea. That would be a way to make it my idea. And as a leader, the last thing you want is everybody thinking of this as, oh, this is Dale's idea. These are Dale's podcasts. No. These are our podcasts. I want everybody to have ownership. I want people to be motivated to help achieve this outcome because they feel ownership of the thing, that they're getting satisfaction from it happening. They're taking personal pride in it happening. So I think my leadership style is a very empowering style and one that helps get folks together and helps them grow and develop. I think this works well when you have really good people that you're working with. This style is less successful if you've got employees that really don't want to work real hard, they're not real good, they're not, et cetera. Then a very empowering, turning them loose approach does not work as well. And maybe why in the arc, you ask about sort of the arc of my leadership, in some ways, one of the first leadership things I had was running a restaurant. Well, in running that restaurant, there were a lot of people there who didn't want to work very hard. The head manager of that restaurant was way more about relationships than he was about getting people to be productive and do things. And so I was really the push to get it done. I was the, hey, you got to meet expectations or something will happen. We'll fire you. And that was part of my career that I worked, but I clearly there's been an evolution to being much more focused on empowering.
Team mentality.
Team mentality.
All right. So I guess really good leaders create followers, but great leaders get people to join them and really buy into their ideas. How do you get people to join you? How did you get me? How did you convince me to do all this and get this podcast together?
Well, to some extent, I'd ask you how I did it. But from my perspective, I heard an idea that was yours, and I've never let go of the fact that it was your idea. Why do I keep saying, oh, this was Madison's idea? Oh, this was Madison's idea. Well, the more I say it's Madison's idea, the more ownership you have of that idea, the more invested you are, the more involved your ego is, etc. I talk about A.J. Armstrong, whose shop we're doing this is in. He's helping with it. Well, I want him to have ownership of it. So the more I talk about we're doing it here at A.J.'s shop, the more he's going to want to make sure it looks really good because it's promoting the quality of a shop. Do I do all that because I naturally want to give people credit? Do I do all that because I'm sort of a humble person that doesn't need the attention? Do I do all that because I know that builds the right outcome? Why is an open question. But I'm convinced when people legitimately, this can't be an act, when people legitimately feel and know, I wouldn't say feel, know that they have some control, that they are driving the bus, that they are helping make these outcomes happen, that's going to be a big motivator for them to work hard to make it happen. The other piece is some personal connection. If you have a boss who you really don't like, you really don't think they're a good person, then you're not going to bust your backside to help them be successful, to help the organization be successful so they look good. If, on the other hand, there's somebody who's driving the bus who you have some affinity for, you think of as basically a good person, they love their spouse, they're good to their children, they don't kick stray dogs, then you're more inclined, well, I want to see them succeed. And so I want the people who, quote, work for me. I hate that terminology. I want them to want things to be successful and to take pride in seeing me be successful.
That's very fair. That's good character goes a long way.
It does.
It really does. So I guess in addition to good character, because that's just kind of the baseline for what makes a good leader, what do you look for in a person that kind of indicates that they will be a strong leader or they are a strong leader?
I'm looking for empathy and respect. And empathy I've talked about, but let me talk a little bit about respect. John Kerrigan, former chancellor of the university, had a poster up in his office that said, "Honor thy faculty." And I might have expanded that to honor all the employees of the university. But that honor, I thought, was such a great word to use. It's not just, oh, as a chancellor, I need the faculty to be doing things so that the university will be successful, so I also look successful as a chancellor. But I should really be honoring them. I should really, you should honor all of the people that you're working with. You should show not just respect for them, which you certainly should, but that you appreciate the contributions that they're making, that you are concerned with and have personal engagement with them. So when I look at, and my spot at the university now, as things are evolving, I'm going to be going from being, at least for a year, the assistant dean to not being the assistant dean. And a number of staff that have been reporting to me will be reporting to somebody else. Well, the person they're going to report to, I am convinced, has a lot of ownership of the success of these other individuals. And so I think it will be easy for folks to have her as their boss, if you will, because she has respect for them. She honors them. She has ownership in their success. And that level of engagement is what I look for. Almost at the bottom of the list, technical skills. I don't care. I really don't care whether your technical skills are the best or not. In a leader, I'm looking for your people skills, the ability to bring folks together, get them to work collaboratively.
All right. So as a millennial, I live in the world of social media, and you look left and this person's getting a promotion, and you look right and this person's buying a house and doing that kind of thing. And so you're always kind of looking at other people and you're going, well, when is that going to happen to me? And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, is it ever too late to become a leader? Like, do you ever miss the train at the station and then you're stuck where you are?
Yes. When you're dead, it's too late.
Okay.
I think at that point you should just let it go. No, I don't think you're ever too late in your career to be a leader. And we'll talk more about this in some of these other sessions, but there's the question, are you a born leader or can you learn to be a leader? And there are some people that are, I think, born leaders. They're just natural leaders. They're naturally in charge. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, Luna, who the daycare folks shared with her father, my son, that they think Luna will at some point be running the world. And Evan obviously asked, well, why do you think Luna will be running the world? Well, we've never had this happen before, but we went to change her and we brought out diaper colored X, whatever, the green diaper. And Luna said, no, not the green diaper. I want one of the orange diapers, and sent the daycare provider back to get the colored diaper that she wanted. That shows a certain leadership skill that I think is rare in a 2-year-old. Now, I'm a somewhat biased grandfather, but there are people who, from early on in their lives, they're the leader. They're the person who stand up and do. But I also believe that leadership is a skill that can be learned. It is not in anything close to either you're a born leader or you're not. And I don't think you're ever too late to learn to be a leader. I would question whether you want to. Some people like being a leader. They enjoy it. And being a leader is useful to them and good in their careers, good for them personally. The objective in life is not to be a leader. Everybody's got to figure out what their own objectives are in life. But in my mind, it revolves more around having a positive impact, enjoying your life, these kinds of things. And you can do that as a leader. You can do this as not. So I wouldn't view leadership as some golden thing that your life is better if you're a leader. Maybe not.
Fair. Okay, so now I have I guess I'm selfishly asking it on the podcast because I'm curious about it, but I'm sure others would be interested to know. So I'm a couple years out of college now. I've had an entry-level job, and I'm at the point where naturally I would be moving into some sort of mid-level management, but I have no experience with, I've never had direct reports. I've never had to lead any kind of team. And so it's kind of a chicken or the egg. Do I get this mid-level management job and start leading people, or and what if it's all, how do I get started? How would you say I would take the next step?
Well, I would suggest trying to do what I would describe, and this is how I encourage organizations to do it, what I would describe as sort of quasi-leadership. So we have a new employee in the organization who needs to be mentored into doing their job. Well, yes, part of the mentoring relationship can come from an immediate supervisor, but part of the mentoring should come from a job incumbent, a parallel person of theirs. So I like to take somebody who I think might make sense to move into leadership and ask them to be a mentor for a new employee. And I find that to be absolutely fascinating. Some people, when you ask them to be a mentor, they say, great, this is wonderful. I'm fascinated to do this. And you've now turned Attila the Hun loose. And they are now demanding and ruining the quality of life of this person who they're supposed to mentor because they're so exacting and overbearing on what they want that person to do. It's like, okay, we'll coach a little bit, but eventually if it doesn't change, we'll figure out, nope, leadership isn't for you. Other people naturally gravitate to that. And to the extent they're not natural, they learn, they get better at it. So I would look for opportunities to do leadership kind of things, even where it's before you have a direct report. Mentoring is, I think, a fine example of that. There's volunteer work where you can do in a volunteer capacity some leadership stuff. You You go to the Cub Scouts and you volunteer to be a den leader, and you're leading a bunch of kids at the Cub Scouts, or you go and volunteer to help organize the brat fry for some fundraiser. I think there are lots of opportunities you can have to lead outside of the formal, I am your boss, you are my subordinate. And I think those others are really way more interesting, in some ways way more challenging. When you're the boss, you now suddenly have this stick of, at some level, I control, do you keep your job? Do I influence your pay? I have this formal authority. Trying to figure out how to lead when you don't have formal authority. But I'm trying to lead by persuasion. I'm trying to lead by other types of, quote, power is, I think, a very valuable thing to do. And then at some point, you can add the formal authority to it. So I would find those volunteer opportunities both at work and in other capacities. Come up with the idea of doing a podcast, and the next thing you know, you're helping run the process of getting the podcast. So you're acquiring some leadership skills.
That's true. All right. Well, what other advice would you have for new leaders, budding leaders? It could be folks in their 20s or onward, really.
One advice, and I've mentioned this a bit before, is to think about whether you want to be a leader. That many of us, it strikes me, sort of have this, and I have nothing against John Wayne, but this John Wayne get ahead America mentality where it should be my objective to get promoted. It should be my objective to move up the organizational hierarchy. I want to go to the high school reunion and be the person who became the CEO of, or the vice president of, or etc. Well, no, I don't think everybody should want to be a leader because that's what they're supposed to do. So my first advice would be to take a deep breath and to ask the question in terms of quality of life, do you want to go into leadership? There are advantages. There's some cool things about being a leader. You can get some things done. You can accomplish things in an organization. There's personal fulfillment. But do you want to be a leader? If you want to be a leader, why? What's the purpose in your life? Why do you want to be in a leadership role? Is it that you're going to get personal growth out of it? That's fine. Is it that you just enjoy being in charge? That's a little less fine, but okay. Is it that there's some organizational outcomes you want to accomplish? Why do you want to move into leadership? And then I would think in terms of mentors. I have been blessed in my life by having some absolutely wonderful mentors. There have been a number of individuals that are highly skilled individuals that have been very accomplished in their lives, who, for reasons that still confound me, thought that investing some of their time and energy in helping Dale grow and develop was a rational thing to do. And why they thought that, I don't know, but I am exceedingly fortunate that it occurred. And having mentors who have strong leadership skills is a hugely valuable thing. You can read some books and there's some technical knowledge in it that's good, and I would encourage that. But I would look, if I'm a new leader, to try and build relationships with individuals that are good leaders. I know folks are somewhat hesitant to try and reach out to someone and ask them to be a mentor. My experience has been it really is one of the easiest asks in the world. Because what's the ask? Fundamentally, you go to somebody and say, hey, you're really good at X. I'd like to be better at X. In some ways, I'd like to be more like you, I'm saying. Would you be willing to talk with me about how you got to be an X and how I could be more like this? So let's break it down from the potential mentor's perspective. You're coming to me and saying you think I'm wonderful at something and you'd like to be more like me and you'd like me to talk about me and why I'm wonderful. I will buy you lunch to have that conversation. You're not imposing on me. This is one of the easiest doggone asks in the world. But people seem to be hesitant to do it. My advice to people earlier on in their career, middle in their career, that are looking to move into leadership, maybe are in leadership and are looking to figure out how to get to be better at this stuff, find people that are good at leadership, contact them, talk to them, ask them to help them think about their leadership skills, and ask them what's been important to them? What have you read that was useful to you in leadership? Read those books and then think about those things and what does it tell you?
Okay. So you've been mentored, and I assume that you mentor other people.
Yes.
And aside from the ego boost, is there anything that you gain from mentoring young leaders? What else is there?
Well, there is an ego boost, I must admit, even though it was both sides of the ego. Because the first time someone came to me and fundamentally said, Dale, I'd like you to be a mentor, I'm like, well, why are you asking me? You're supposed to ask old, wise people this stuff. And I'm not old or wise. And then I thought about it, I thought, well, I am old. I'm checking one of those boxes and we'll leave wise alone. So, okay. But it was weird going from someone who acquired and was valuing mentors helping me to being a mentor. So it was both a good thing for my ego. It was also you're aging, check mark. But yes, I thoroughly enjoyed it from that perspective. One of the things that we know is that as people age, their focus tends to change. When I was your age, I was very focused on my career and growth and development and what I could do to get ahead. I had student loan debt and I had a house and I had house payments and car payments, I assume, and loads of that stuff. Well, as I've aged, things have changed. Some of that stuff has sort of been taken care of. And the other thing that happens is that as you age, and psychologically, we know this tends to happen when your parents die. And I'm still fortunate enough to have my mother alive, who's in amazing shape at 91. But when your mother's in 91 and describes herself as being in extra innings, some of this does start to kick in. You start to recognize your own mortality, and paying it back becomes more important. I've been very blessed in my life in so many ways. I cannot repay the people who were mentors to me. I can't do anything for Ed Penson. I can't do anything for Jim Geeps or Al Hartman. I simply can't. They're in a position in life. There's nothing I can do for them. On the other hand, I can pay it forward. So if I can find other individuals that I can make a contribution to their life and maybe in some small way be as positive in their life as these individuals have been in mine, that feels good. So it's a paying it forward sort of thing.
All right. So who for you can you think of has been maybe the most influential and inspirational leader in your lifetime?
My mother.
And why is that?
She was, from my perspective, the leader of the family. I watched her lead. My mother's 91. She led in an environment where most women aren't sort of supposed to be the leader, that the leader of the family is supposed to be the guy. And just observing my mother, I saw how my father sort of won every battle and my mother won every war. Not that they were very often in disagreement, but just the way she managed things was such that the big picture outcome she always wanted, she almost always got. She went back to school and became a school teacher. Her father, her mother, and my father all thought it was a bad idea for her to get a career because she should stay home and raise the kids, and she didn't. And she was right, and she did it. And she really led the family. She led her classroom. She was an amazing teacher. So it was watching, I think, her lead gave me some of these skills and understanding of leadership. Inspirational is maybe a little more complicated. My mother's a very successful individual, very compassionate individual. She now leads at the age of 91. She runs the local clothes closet in her county where people donate clothes and then people who are in need get the clothes. And so that at 91, she's still leading and doing things for the common good, or she puts it, putting something back in the pot. I find kind of inspirational. And I would love to get to be 91 in the kind of physical shape she's in, going to the Y 5 days a week, working out, and donating time, helping make something good happen for our society. That'd be cool.
Yeah. Moms are great. So I guess I'm kind of changing directions now, but can you tell me how long you've been with UW Oshkosh?
Not exactly because I keep forgetting, but I think 38, 39 years.
Okay, so you started teaching in the 80s?
Oh yeah, in the 80s.
Okay, so you have
I was
taught,
relatively young.
you've taught college students, you've taught um, Gen X,
Mm-hmm.
you've taught millennials,
Mm-hmm.
now you're teaching some of Gen Z.
Yep.
Can you kind of talk about the changes in generations? Are they really as big as everyone makes it? Oh, millennials are this, and now Gen Z is this. Are they really that different?
No.
Okay.
No, I think that's nonsense. And yeah, I've seen a lot of evolution. When I first started teaching, I was 27, something like that. So I was doggone near the same age as the students. And that's evolved over time to where now the students are significantly younger than my children. I have seen a lot of those sort of generational evolutions. And are there differences? Yeah. And some of the friends of mine like hanging with me or talking to me because occasionally there are expressions and things that I can help explain to them because I interact enough with the students that I'm hip to the lingo, if you will. But in the big picture, if I look at college students, if anything, if I've looked at a change, they're more serious. I don't know, smarter, but they're more serious, more dedicated, maybe even more of a work ethic than when I was a student. I mean, I was a student in the 70s. I was a hippie. We weren't known for our work ethic. Peace, man. But generally speaking, I think the generational difference discussion, while there are important differences, is overdone. I'm a fan of evolutionary psychology. I'm a fan that human beings' fundamental base behaviors, base drives, base goals, base ambitions have not changed over a few generations, and it would take hundreds of generations for these things to change. And I am convinced that as a society, we put way too much effort, focus on our differences as opposed to our similarities. And I don't want to go into the politics stuff, but there are some folks now that are very much pro-Trump and some folks that are very much anti-Trump, and there's this big divide. Well, I think it's way overdone. I don't see society as nearly as divided as almost everybody else seems to. The vast, vast majority of the pro-Trump folks love their country, love their spouses, love their kids, and want to see the world a better place. And the vast majority of the non-Trump folks love their spouses, love their kids, want to see the world a better place. I really don't think they're all that different. Now, maybe I'm being naive and Pollyanna, but I don't see that they're nearly as big a differences as we often focus on. And as I look at the generation of students, I teach mostly juniors and seniors. They're interested in learning, growing, getting jobs, starting their career, and moving on. And I'll bet you the freshmen and sophomore are still largely like freshmen and sophomore were when I was a freshman and sophomore. They want to find beer and people of whatever gender interests them, and that's their focus. And I don't think that's changed a lot in the last 40 years, and I will go out on a limb and predict it won't change much in the next 40. I think beer will still be big 40 years from now.
Hopefully. Hopefully in my lifetime. All right. So then what advice do you have for those who are new in leadership?
I would, for many of the folks that are new in leadership, are relatively young in their life. And this is sort of a nugget I would encourage folks to take away, is that if you're trying to get better at being a leader and you're sort of, but how do I do that? I would suggest that you be good at raising your family. And that may be sort of, I'm not, these two are a disconnect. But I find that the same skill set that you need to be a leader of an organization, you need to be leading people in a business arena. It's a lot of the same skill set you need to be leading your children, that it really does overlap. and that leading children and leading the family and helping the family grow and develop is a highly valuable skill, and that most of what happens in terms of motivation, if it motivates your kids, it motivates your subordinates. And not that your kids are your subordinates, but there's enough overlap there. I find that thinking about your relationship with your kids can really help be a springboard to relationship in terms of leadership. And to some extent, when I'm looking at a person as a potential leader, one of the things you'd asked that question before, one of the things I'm looking at is what's their relationship with those that are close to them. And I've found that the best leaders that I've known usually have found a way to have very good relationships with their children, and that child-parent relationship is indicative of the style and the approach that they take in their work relationships. One quick story. I do stuff on conflict, and some of that is thinking about conflict styles and how you respond to conflict. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, at some point. But I'll ask people as part of that, were you ever in a mode where you had curfew that your parents had imposed and you decided to violate curfew? And most people say yes. There are times I violated curfew because, okay, why? And we talk about that. And occasionally there are people who say, no, I never violated curfew. Okay, why? Let's talk about that. And almost all the people who said, no, it's because, well, I think my parents would have killed me if they caught me. The cost, the punishment would have been so severe that I wasn't willing to take that risk. One person, and all the times I've asked that question, said, nope, never violated curfew. Why? I didn't want to disappoint my father. I didn't want to disappoint my father. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. And at the time, I didn't know her father. I have now grown to know her father very well, Jim Ransom, CEO of Bemis North America and part of these podcasts. And it doesn't amaze me now that I know Jim and I know his leadership style in the business arena that he had that kind of relationship with his children. So I think you can learn a lot by figuring out how to manage relationships with your children, significant others, other people in your life that will be applicable in the leadership role.
Very interesting. All right. Taking it in one more direction, fun direction, different direction. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Got it.
He has not heard any of these. Actually, you might have heard of 2 of them, but that's okay. I gave him a little bit of a primer. But describe yourself in 5 words.
5 words. I think of myself as being energetic. I think of myself as being driven. I think of myself as being empathetic. I think of myself as being lazy. I think of myself as being outgoing.
How can you be lazy and driven at the same time? Please elaborate.
Oh, I think I don't think it's possible that you are driven unless you also perceive yourself as lazy. One of my sons believes that you have to have a certain level of self-loathing if you are going to grow and develop and become all you can be. And I think you have to have a certain level of, I perceive myself as being lazy to motivate you to do more. I don't go to the gym often enough. I go to the gym 3 days a week. I want to be there 5. And if I wasn't so damn lazy, I'd be there 5 days a week. I'm also a 65-year-old guy who goes to the gym 3 days a week and puts in a couple hours. Okay. So now, am I lazy or am I driven? Well, I wouldn't be so driven to be at the Y if I didn't think I was too damn lazy, and I really ought to be there more. And I should.
Amen. I love that. Okay. Well, this kind of plays into it, but what's your biggest flaw?
I would have to say my stupidity. The number of times that I've done things and then in retrospect thought, Dale, no, that was not the right. There was so much better a way to do that. There was so much better a way to have managed that scenario that I'm not faster on my feet. I'm not a quicker thinker. I'm not as intellectually agile as I should be, and not disciplined enough. I don't read enough. I don't. There are not enough authors that I can quote and I truly understand. I could go on and on.
Advice that my mother has imparted to me. I don't know if we want to crop this out. It's not that exciting, but men are stupid and women are crazy. And it's kind of accurate. When you really boil it down to the constituent part, it's stupid and crazy.
Well, that's an interesting observation. Men are more stupid, women are more crazy, and I think I think of myself in many ways as being bi, not in the sexual orientation sense, but in the interest, etc. sense. My wife has a better sense of direction than I do. She usually drives. There are lots of things in our relationship where she's much more what society would generally describe as the male in the relationship, and I'm more the female. If we disagree, which doesn't happen very often, I can't go to bed and sleep well unless we've kissed and made up. She's just fine. Oh, we'll get over it. Don't worry about it. But I think I share the characteristics of being both stupid and crazy.
Oh, that's great.
But crazy, we got to be careful with crazy. There's a great book, Being Sane in Insane Places, which there was a guy who was a psychology prof, and he had, I don't know, half a dozen, I can't remember. I read this back when I was a grad student, admitted to what was at that point called an insane asylum. And he had these grad students admitted to the insane asylum, and they all had diagnoses. So you're going in as a paranoid schizophrenic, you're going in as this, you're going in as that. And he told them all, look, just act perfectly normal. I don't role play this disease, but just be yourself. And the question was, how long would it take the staff to figure out that these people were not paranoid schizophrenics? They were not XYZ. They were perfectly sane and normal. The staff did not identify a single one of them in the time period of the study ever as being normal. They never got it. They never understood it. However, every one of them busted by the other people in the insane asylum. Every one of them was outed by other people in the insane asylum who said, "What are you doing here? You're not crazy. I know crazy, and it's not you." So if somebody ever calls me crazy, I'm like, well, if you really know if I'm crazy or not, best as I can figure, that means you're insane. So
it's a good comeback.
But
if
I'm
anyone
crazy.
Comes at you with it. Okay, so you referenced literature a lot in a lot of these podcasts. What can you? Is there one book that you think everyone should read? That good of a book?
And it's not easy sledding, I would say, but I would go with Rawls' A Theory of Justice. Thomas Rawls, and it's a book I've read repeatedly, and I've more often than any other book I've read had to go back and read the chapter before again so that I could really understand it. But Rawls has a fascinating analysis of justice, titled A Theory of Justice. I think many would argue that Rawls is the preeminent philosopher of our day, that as we think of the great philosophers of history that have preceded us, that Rawls is going to be the one out of the 1900s who sticks around. And he says lots of things that are absolutely fascinating and I find very interesting. My son, who understands Rawls better than I, jokes about the fact that I focus on this one, but Rawls very much believes that humans are risk averse, and therefore we want to maximize the minimum prize. We want to do what we can so that the worst case outcome is okay. And I think that's true. I think humans are risk averse. It meshes with my observation. And in business, we often are, in my mind, far too cautious, far too trying to make sure that the worst case scenario is okay, and not asking enough the question, but what would be the best case scenario? What's even the most likely scenario? Fortune favors the bold.
All right. What is one of the biggest professional challenges that you've ever had to face?
Oh, it's an ongoing one that I face all the time. I'm an entrepreneur. I think of myself as being creative. I think of myself as thinking of new ideas. I think of myself of doing things. These podcasts are something relatively new that we're doing. There's a master's in business leadership that I have in my head, and a number of the staff have helped me work through and work on. We have an executive MBA program that didn't exist previously, and a previous dean said we ought to have one, but I was part of the group that got that going, and I've had responsibility for helping to manage that and keep that going. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm one who thinks of how to make things happen. The university environment is not an environment that is sort of generally supportive of entrepreneurs. If I was in a business environment, I think the level of natural gravity to, oh, let's try things would be very different. But in the university environment, partially for some very good reasons, we tend to be a much slower moving organization, a much more thoughtful organization, and there tends to be lots of steps in the process that make it take a long time to do things. And so I find the challenge of, well, how can we get that done? How can we do that? I think it's a good idea, but I just, going between where we are now and making it happen, what are the obstacles that are going to have to be overcome due to the inertia that is built into any large bureaucracy, but particularly in academic bureaucracy, is a fascinating challenge and is sort of, from a temperament perspective, it's a fish swimming upstream. I'm sort of out of my natural environment.
All right. Who has been your favorite boss?
I have been exceedingly fortunate to have a number of great bosses. If I go all the way back to when I was in junior high, before I could drive, I worked on a farm, and Park Gast, who ran the farm, was a great boss who taught me a lot about working hard and working efficiently. When I came to the university, Cliff Larson hired me. He was a great boss. Bob Milam was the dean of the College of Business, and he taught me a lot about being entrepreneurial. I learned a lot from him. After Bob Milam, I had Al Hartman was the dean, and Al was a great boss. In many ways, was a step up from Bob Milam. There was an interim dean there who I was not on the same page with, Bill Talon, but I learned from him, but he was certainly not my favorite boss. Scott Beyer was then the acting dean, and he was a great boss. But each one of these in progression has gotten to be a better boss. And I would say the boss that I have now, Dean Barb Rao, is the best boss I've ever had. She is exceedingly insightful in terms of the human condition. She is exceedingly compassionate, and yet she has a strong set of expectations and a strong motivation. She clearly has a strong ability to get things done and to hold people accountable when that is necessary, balancing that with being concerned for the human condition. So her compassion, her empathy, combined with her drive to make good things happen, has been the most exciting to be around, and she has been exceedingly supportive of the things I've tried to do and helped me with the various obstacles that occur when you're a fish out of water at the university environment.
So your idea of the best boss has kind of evolved over time as you've evolved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My idea of the best boss has evolved, and I would have told you the last boss I had was my best boss, with one exception, all the way along the line. I might very well be at the faculty long enough that I'll have another boss after Dean Rao. We'll see if they can possibly top her. That's a tough act to follow, but we'll see.
Okay, so have you've heard of maybe the Clifton Strengths, Myers-Briggs, True Colors, all these personality tests. Do you find them valid? And
No.
do you think they're worthwhile in the workplace?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't think they're valid, and this isn't my opinion. This is data. The vast majority of these personality tests are not good at reliably measuring personality. Personality, by definition, is a trait that you have that exists over time and over various environments. So this is a trait that I have that's true whether I'm being interviewed for a podcast, or I'm talking to a student, or I'm talking to my boss, or I'm talking to my wife, or I'm talking to my wife in an environment where everything's going well, or I'm talking to somebody when the environment is going badly. This is true for you sort of generally over time. And we know that for almost all of these things, the environment in which you take the test influences the outcomes, whether it's Myers-Briggs or DISC or what have you. My understanding is that they don't have good reliability, they have good repeatability. If you don't have reliability, you can't have validity, etc. However, I think they're all exceedingly valuable. Humans are different across each other, and they have various personality types. And I think all of these things help stimulate that discussion of personality types. So people are different, and they're also different over time, but they're different. And understanding that, I am an extrovert in many ways. In some ways, I'm an introvert. But understanding that extroverts and introverts are different, and how you're going to motivate them and interact and deal with them needs to be different, is a very valuable thing. In organizations, we have tried to move. I'm old enough to remember when the world was full and run by white guys, and now we've evolved to where the labor force is significantly more diverse. There's much more variety in terms of race and sex and sexual orientation and gender and all kinds of things, which is great. But unfortunately, to a large extent, I think we're still stuck far too much at I need to tolerate this. I need to understand that these people are different than me, and that I need to tolerate those differences. And in my mind, that's just a terrible objective. The objective isn't to tolerate the fact that people are different than me. It's to celebrate the fact that people are different than me. And how can we use those differences to make better decisions? And to the extent that all of these personality tests encourage me to understand that people are different personality-wise. Hopefully I even understand they're different personality-wise at different times in their lives and different environments. All of that's going to help me, I would hope, to be engaged with them in a way that helps them be engaged with me, and we make better decisions.
Very nice. All right. You are Assistant Dean, your many titles at UWO. You've got a lot going on, a lot of irons in the fire.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you take vacation?
Well, this is kind of a question of definition. I define myself at this point as having a hobby, which people pay me for. So I have a hobby, and it's being the Assistant Dean of the College of Business. So to some extent, vacation's an interesting concept. There's the Winnie the Pooh line. What's today? Today's Monday. Oh, one of my favorite days of the week. Well, Monday is one of my 7 favorite days of the week. I look forward to Monday just as much as I look forward to Friday or Saturday or Sunday. So it's kind of all vacation. I travel. Our executive MBA program has an international trip, so I go on those trips. Now that's kind of work, but it's kind of vacation. I do take vacation with some regularity with family. My wife and I will go on trips. I have 6 children, and I go on trips with them. I have 6 grandchildren, and they're now, the oldest is old enough at 8 that I'm starting to go on trips with her and take vacations with her. And I'm a big fan of vacations with one or a couple of those next gen or generation after that. So I'm taking more vacations. I'm in a phase in life where I can afford to do that, and it is consistent with the work environment. So I do take time off.
Good.
From what people would describe as work.
Last one. Which U.S. president do you admire the most?
I would have to say Thomas Jefferson, and it is a mixed bag. All human beings have pluses and minuses. I find Jefferson to be absolutely fascinating. I highly admire the breadth of his knowledge, the wide variety of things that Jefferson studied, that he understood, that he knew about, is just almost I can't comprehend. How could he have that kind of architectural skill? He could have that natural history skill, a legal skill, philosophy skill, could speak all those different languages, read those languages. The extent to which he had such a diverse intellectual command is just phenomenal. President Kennedy was once asked about his cabinet that became then the subject of the book The Best and the Brightest, because many identified Kennedy's cabinet as the greatest collection of talent in any cabinet. He was just really good at getting those folks into the cabinet. And Kennedy said with some satisfaction that he believes that when his cabinet is there meeting in the White House, it is the greatest collection of minds, in Kennedy's words, greatest collection of minds that has ever occurred in the White House since Thomas Jefferson has dined here alone. And I find that to be maybe an overstate, but maybe not. Jefferson's breadth of knowledge was just absolutely amazing. And I find that breadth to be amazing. I think his insights into some of the human condition with regard to laying out issues associated with how the government was going to be organized was very insightful. His relationship with Madison and Monroe and his mentoring of them and his ability to bring along some of the next generation, absolutely fascinating. So from that perspective, very much admire Thomas Jefferson. However, as with all human beings, there are pluses and minuses, and Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. Clearly, owning slaves is hardly something to be admired. It's to be abhorred. And you can do all of the rationale of, well, it was his times, and that was what was done, and that was the life that he led. All right, I can accept some of that cultural analysis, but truly to be admired would have been someone who would have taken a deep breath and said, this is wrong, and I'm going to free all the slaves. You also have to wonder about his relationship with Sally Hemings. Was that a relationship that he truly loved Sally Hemings, and Hemings lived him, and it was only because in that day and age, a master and a black person wouldn't have gotten married, and he'd made a promise to his wife when she was dying that he would never remarry, and that's why that relationship existed as it did? Or was it more a master demanding that kind of relationship of a slave? I don't know that we have data that gives us the answer to that question. So that gives me pause in terms of admiring Thomas Jefferson, but he had a number of characteristics that I find very admirable.
Very nice. I don't know much about Jefferson, but maybe I'll look into him.
I can recommend some works on Jefferson.
Yeah. All right. That is Dale Feinauer, everyone.
Thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we look forward to you on the next one.
It's Time is a production of the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs in association with Venture Project Studios. Executive producer, Aaron J. Armstrong. Host, Professor Dale Feinauer. Creative Director, Madisen Potratz. Director of Photography, Elazar Kloon. Audio and Video Editor, Elazar Kloon. Marketing Strategy, Tara Larson. Social Media, Anwar Mahana. A special thanks to L Creative, TopView Media, Michael Patton, and the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh College of Business Graduate Programs.